Welcome to Collision, the podcast where we discuss the fun and sometimes complicated collision of real life and trusting God. If you're curious or confused about how to engage the world we live in, we hope our conversation here helps. Now, let's get into this episode of Collision.
Well, welcome to the Collision podcast. I'm Matt Manning, the pastor here at Crossroads Church, and I am with Stu Jackson. I think that's your chair now.
This is my chair. I like this chair.
Yes.
I got the groove worked in real good. It's nice.
You're all warmed in. And so I know that you had a conversation with your son. He gave you some feedback when it comes to the podcast. Do you want to share it with everybody?
Well, fan mail is a big thing for me, and I guess a fan phone call from my son is a big thing too. And he said the podcast is okay. Okay, which I don't know in 20-year-old speak. I don't know what that is. I don't know where that ranks. But then he said I'm a little uptight. He said I'm not loose.
You're not loose.
So I'm not sure how that equates. But hey, I'm going to try and be looser today.
You're going to be looser. Well, we'll work on that. We'll get you a drink. We'll get you some apple juice.
Apple juice. It'll look right. I'll do the Nick Offerman, sit here for an hour and just sit and sip apple juice.
That's right. So we are in April. This is our April podcast, if you didn't know that.
That's good to know.
And the NHL playoffs have began. And tonight is a special night. Do you know why tonight's a special night?
Gabe Landeskog is playing?
That's right. Rumor has it that Gabe is back.
Yeah, I did not realize, and thank you to Mr. Manning here, not only the mayor of Matttown, but
from our last podcast.
Our last podcast. If you don't know that, you should go back and watch it. But the reason Gabe is still with the Avalanche is because the NHL teams really can't just jettison a guy when he's hurt. He's still on the team. And
he's still on the team.
Gabe signed quite a contract a few years ago.
He signed a nice contract. And so, 3 years. But he could be the first, hockey player that comes back from this injury, right? Only Lonzo Ball? Yeah, Lonzo Ball up in Chicago. He had the same surgery, but he was the first guy that came back. Gabe will be the second.
And how long has it been since he played?
3 years.
3 years.
He last played in the Stanley Cup.
That is
incredible. So this is the third playoff from there.
That is incredible.
Yeah, so over 1,000 games. So this is an exciting day for Colorado.
Well, I think that just tends to indicate that we're just going to go win the Cup again this year.
Yeah, so, I like it. I like where your mind's at.
Yeah, why not?
Right there. So out of that light subject, what we want to talk today is actually something else that's happening in Colorado, and that is the law that is known as the HB 25-1312.
Excellent.
Do you know anything about this?
I've heard a little bit about it, and I got to give you props for not having to read that from behind my head because I would have had the numbers all screwed up.
That's where my life's been the last couple weeks.
You'll have to remind me the name of the law. I know what it is. It has a name associated with it.
Yes, it's the I don't want to mess it up. It's either the Kelly Loving Act or I think it's the Kelly Loving Act.
I think it's the Kelly Loving.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
That's the quote unquote the name.
Yes,
and has to do with transgender individuals in the state, and particularly when it comes to areas of custody battles and places of divorce, as well as some things that have to do with schools.
Right.
And this has caused quite an uproar, particularly among more historical, biblical holders of faith like us.
Sure.
In terms of all the things that are with it. And so, you have examples of so in a custody battle, if you have one parent who is misgendering or what is known as dead naming, not going by the preferred name, that can be a way that in custody, that is part of the list of determining factors of who that child ends up with.
Right. The judge has to take into consideration by this current House bill that has passed the House. It passed on April 6th.
Yep.
And is now sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee, I believe.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things that this law said, should it become law, is that a judge has to take into consideration essentially the treatment of said transgender youth in determining custody and things like that.
Yeah. So this has opened up a whole lot of questions really kind of the 2 weeks before Easter, tons of conversation around this.
Oh, yeah.
Other pastors who called me going, hey, what's Crossroads looking like doing? People from our own congregation concerned about this, with just kind of a litany of things that go through that. And I just thought maybe we just talk a little bit about that today. And then really, like, what does it look like for a Christian to be active in the public square? Like, what does that ultimately look like? And so, when it comes to this bill, ultimately, I think that for those who put the bill forward, that this is actually out of empathy. Now, I don't know that like most people on the right would maybe see that, but
Right.
all of this came out of a survey that was done with transgendered folk in Colorado, where the results were nowhere near what anybody would want them to be.
Right.
Where 40% of transgendered people have had suicidal thoughts in the last year. When it comes to the suicide rate of teenagers who are transgendered or going through gender care, it's 32 times higher than the average teenager. There was reports of not just discriminatory behavior, but even abuse in terms of transgender. And so part of this law actually is really for some, particularly on the left. Colorado Senate is quite liberal.
We are significantly left.
Yes, we are. We're not a purple state. We are a blue state.
Nope, we are full
and
blue.
it is really being seen as like a social justice issue. It's about saving people, and I think from like a Christian perspective, while we might like disagree on the method or maybe even the why of some of these statistics, I can appreciate anybody who sees the value of a human life and wants to do something about it.
Absolutely.
We can meet there.
Yeah, and I run along the lines of we are all God's children and are loved and try and treat people as such. Now, that is certainly a middle of the road, and in today's world, middle of the road tends to be the most dangerous road.
Right.
So you're usually going to get hit by a car
Yes.
when you're in the middle of the road.
Absolutely. So I think that like the big issue, or maybe a couple of the big issues, and I just like to kind of hear your thoughts as it, as we just talked through this. And so like, one of the big issues that people are genuinely, I would say, anxious about in this is when it comes to parental rights. And it very much feels that there is an infringement here on parental rights where the government has crossed over the line into the house, and particularly if you are someone of faith, where, and we can talk more about this in a second, but as someone of faith who holds the scriptures when it comes to LGBTQ issues, that they're not coherent with what it looks like to live biblically, that all of a sudden, this seems to be a stepping over of that line. And so when you first read that bill, what was your reaction to it in that regard?
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's terrifying. I struggle with government trying to tell me how to parent.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I will acknowledge that there are some parents that need that guidance. Do I think it's the government that should be doing that? Probably not. I think there's probably some child care that needs to go on in the government, but I don't think they need to come into my house. And that's the hardest part is we're not teaching people how to care and support folks that are going through a time in their life where this is forefront. It especially concerns me about youth. And that's a whole nother, that's a lifetime of topics when you start getting into youth transgenderism and gender care and all that stuff. But it bothers me when we start telling parents how they can talk to, address, or anything with their kids. Because, as my son, who told me to loosen up, will tell you, the only time he heard his name is when he was in trouble. And me growing up,
And it was his middle name as well.
yeah, oh yeah, me growing up, you heard the middle name, that's it. You're in trouble. My parents, I'm pretty sure I heard on more than one occasion, I brought you into this world and I will take you out of it.
Right.
And so now you have a group of people that honestly struggle to make a normal decision, now coming in and telling me as a parent, that I can't, I can't raise my child
Yeah.
in a way that they find,
Yeah.
preferential for them.
Yeah, one of the things that we actually talked about, kind of as the leadership team here at Crossroads, is that a significant majority, is the way that I would put it, a significant majority of teenagers who have gender dysphoria or even, want to move down the transgendered path, that a strong majority is actually resolved towards heterosexual tendencies by the time puberty ends.
Right.
And so, from like a Christian perspective, if my child came to me with thoughts of transgender or gender dysphoria in this way, that I think that my response would be to slow play it,
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
To walk with them, not to be so quick to switch the names, have those conversations, right? When it comes to quote unquote preferred pronouns, like to be slow on that and to not be so affirming in this, knowing that not be affirming, but to walk with them caringly.
Absolutely.
As we go through this in a way that, as they move through puberty, that they know that their parents are with them in this, and yet at the same time we're slow playing that. But what's scary about this law is that could then be used against
Right.
A parent in a custody battle.
Well, and it's
it's
terrifying to me because it seems like such a rush to judgment. My 3-year-old likes the color pink.
Yeah.
Okay. And it just, all of a sudden, there's just this, I feel like in today's world, there's just this rush. Well, obviously, he's been misgendered.
Yeah.
Or, my daughter loves trucks. Instead of saying, okay, let's go look at trucks and stuff like that, and just going with that attitude at the moment, because, I mean, even to this date, at my age, I'm like, ooh, look at that. And I go over there for a while.
Yeah.
I drive my wife nuts, with hobbies. I have a different hobby every afternoon.
Yeah.
But, it's that kind of thing. It's the sudden rush to judgment and then application of a label. Okay, this is who you are now.
Yeah.
Without regard to maturing
Yeah.
and growth and that biological process of, becoming an adult where everything is in flux.
Yes.
And so that, we talk about how that affects people. It's that challenge. It's that, wait a minute, hold on. Like you, I might slow play that a little bit and just see what's happening and, love and care and all that stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah. Another big issue that's kind of been brought up is that this is kind of the, it's not so much this issue, right? Like, very bluntly, right? If you don't want to deal with this law, don't get a divorce and don't abuse your kids, where social service comes up, right? And in large part, this law doesn't impact you greatly. I think that there is a lot of fear in terms of what precedents this sets for future laws,
Absolutely.
right? And so we look at it in the state of Colorado, and we've walked through the whole marijuana, legislation here.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And when it started, it was like, marijuana is not so bad, right? And actually, it can be used good. And so it was like, well, we'll write a law that it can only be used in medical circumstances. And so all of these, medical marijuana places popped up, but that was as far it was going to go.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, pretty soon, it was like, well, it's not as bad as anything else, and it's just like alcohol.
yeah, look,
and,
it's survived this long. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
See?
And so then it turned into the laws were made, and it was like recreational marijuana was allowed into our state, and then. It was like, but that's as far as it's going to go, right? Like, there will never be dispensaries around schools. And now, the high school that my kids go to, less than a half a mile away is a marijuana dispensary, right? And it's like, the thing when marijuana came out was like, which was quite ironic because the state at the same time was spending tons of money, millions of dollars, to fight back drug use, and they named marijuana as a gateway drug. And then within 6 years, you have dispensaries a half a mile away from high schools.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
you have this slippery slope. Now, I'm not a big, buyer of slippery slopes, but we've seen it before, right? And I think that there is a fear, right, that this just opens the door to, if this can happen at a custody level,
Sure.
then can this at some point be classified honestly as abuse, where a kid can be taken away or out of a home. You could spin that even further. Like if it's in this bill right now covers public spaces, which churches are not. Churches are not, they're religious spaces.
Right.
But it's not a hard jump to say, hey, one day
Right.
this law could ban, churches' ability to speak on this the way that we hold that the Bible speaks about it.
Right.
And, and you just see this slippery slope down the road.
And that's one of the arguments about HB 25-1312 is it a First Amendment violation?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's been established that using somebody's non-preferred name is considered a First Amendment right.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're walking down that road, and you talk about the slippery slope from a parental perspective. And my kids are out of school and they're starting their own adult lives. But what if my kid went to school and said, my dad keeps calling me Sally, and because I did. When the kids were younger, that was one of the things, when you're giving them a hard time, I'd always come up with a different girl's name. There was never one girl's name. It was all the girls' name, just whatever happened to
just a picture
happen to land.
Into the stew parenting here.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be looking at him and be like, get up off the ground, Sabrina, you're just fine. It was meant lovingly, and giving them a hard time. But now with this kind of bill, at some point, could my son say something to a school counselor that my dad gives me a hard time by calling me a girl's name and I don't like it because, boom, all of a sudden, my son who says, well, yeah, sometimes I think, thoughts about being a girl. And all of a sudden, my son is involved with Child Protective Services and everything else. That's a real fear for me.
Yeah.
Is that something like that goes on.
Yeah. And I think at the same time, as we think through the fears of what this bill could bring into the future, and nobody knows, right? I don't have a crystal ball of what that looks like. But there is also the reality that the church hasn't done a good job when it comes to these issues, when it comes to the LGBTQ issues, that there is a reason in large part that churches are, seen as bigoted in this,
Absolutely.
right? Where churches have been labeled in certain ways, judgmental, where there has been, in large part, there's been a lot of things that have happened within the church and what the church has allowed that has not probably been as God-honoring as we would like it to be. Sure. And in a way, we've lost our voice in this. And so it's one of the fascinating things in this is that kind of the beacon of conservative Christianity is in Colorado Springs.
Yes, absolutely. Focus on the family.
Yeah, and it makes zero difference in our state.
Yes.
Like the Christians have lost their voice on this issue, in part because we haven't figured out what it looks like to actually come with the same empathy that these politicians are coming with when it comes to these issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and I think you're obviously closer to it than I am, but one of the things that I think that has affected the church is, as Christians, we don't want to stand up and, call a spade, mm-hmm. or however you want to go about saying that. Churches have kind of, I think, lost that voice because it's really, when you take a stand mm-hmm. and then you say, well, come one, come all. Yeah. Christ said, bring me bring me everybody.
Yeah.
If anybody can come to me, and through me they will see the Lord. And so, if as a church you say this is wrong, now are you directly going against Christ's wishes? So it's a real problem for churches to take a stand on these things, and I think that's where our voice has started to. It started to really kind of lose a power or anything mm-hmm. like that. And at the same time, I see it, like in a thing like this where we're coming to terms and understanding what's going on in today's society. Yeah. There's these big opportunities to say, hey, we love everybody.
Yeah.
But we have some problems with this.
Yeah, one of the lines that we use here at Crossroads, and we're by no means perfect in this, and we've looked at this a lot, and we're asking a lot of questions. Even today, we're asking a lot of questions when it comes to these issues. Is what does it look like to be loving but not affirming? And so how do we do that, and how do we do that well? And like I said, I don't know that we have the right answer yet. I think we fall short in a lot of ways.
Sure.
You know, somehow we have been able to figure it out in, say, a case like divorce, right, where divorces happen, and we're able to come alongside in a way that says, look, we love you, and we're going to help you walk through this, right?
Right.
Even though we believe that divorce is, in most cases, wrong. And so, like there's a lot of work to do when it comes to churches, when it comes to this. And yet at the same time, there's moments like this where political stuff happens that, what does it look like for a Christian to enter into the public square?
Absolutely.
And so, you kind of have the two extreme sides of it. One is do nothing, and try to remain as apolitical as possible. And, there's a lot of wisdom in that, particularly as a pastor of a church who, is pretty well broken up, I would say, about 40% Republican, 30% Democrat, 30% Libertarian at Crossroads Church. We are pretty even across the line. Remaining apolitical is really wise in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. And people like to talk about it.
Yes.
People like to talk about those issues and to remain neutral.
Yeah.
That's really hard.
Yeah. And so there's that side of it. And then there's the side that, that's happening right here in Colorado that, is being more forceful, protests and petitions and that kind of stuff. And, to a degree, even more aggressive tactics than that. And so you have these kind of two sides. And so what does it look like? I mean, in your opinion, what does it look like when it comes to an issue like this that, violates the way that we understand biblical principle? And yet at the same time, we want to be loving in all of this, even with the people who've written the bills.
Right.
Like, in your mind, what does it look like to enter into the public square in this space? Period.
Wow.
Question mark.
Wow. For any of those people curious, that horn honking you heard was the yellow bus that just ran me over, asking me how do you engage in the public square? And I mean, that's the boy. Is that easy or what?
What do you think?
The hardest thing for me is exactly what you described. When you run into a situation that your beliefs are screaming, and it's that red flashing light in the side of your head that, what do I say here?
Yeah.
That's hard for me because I tend to be somebody that just kind of, I try to be apolitical, like you said.
Yeah.
You know what? There used to be rules in my house that with my father-in-law, Dave.
Yeah.
And my family and stuff, that politics were not allowed. Do not speak politics in my house because I don't want to hear the arguing.
Yeah.
And in my own head, I think that was actually the rule going on. Don't say anything so you don't hear anything.
Yeah.
And so as I've matured and gotten older, sorry. Okay, gotten older. We'll cut out that first part. Edit. But it's one of those that I have to look at exactly what you said. That my job is to love that person.
Yeah.
And the hardest part is, people, it's really easy to pass judgment on somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, man, is it easy. Anybody can do it. I can judge anybody. But that's not the right thing to do. And there's one person, thing in this universe that made the universe that's going to pass judgment.
Yeah.
And that's where that decision has to come from. For me, I need to love that person however I can.
Yeah.
And I need to, at times, learn to put away my difference.
Yeah.
And say, that's not me. That's okay. I'm going to love them like God wants me to love them and do the best I can with it.
Yeah.
In a public square, when we're talking about different issues, stuff like that, I will do my best. I really try to speak from an information perspective.
Yeah.
Truth. that there's no shades of truth. There's the truth.
Yep.
And there's not the truth. And so if somebody comes to me and says, how do you feel about this? I'm going to speak from a perspective of truth, not emotion, as best I can.
Yeah.
Now, cutting emotion out for anybody is difficult.
Right.
But this is my argument because these are the things I know and where I've heard that.
Yeah.
But yelling at somebody because they've made a decision in their life doesn't, all it does is make more angst and stuff. So engaging in the public square, it's trying to be informed, trying to understand the perspective of the other person, and then speaking from a position of, this is what I believe.
Yeah.
I don't want to yell at somebody because I don't hear my opinion coming out of their mouth.
Yes.
And that seems to be so much of the protest and everything else today is, I don't like you because I don't hear you saying what I want you to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, Christians from a public, a public interaction like that, I think it's their responsibility to take and have a measured response of, this is taking the emotion out, and speaking from a spot of, well, what Christ would want me to believe is to love this person.
Yeah.
You know what? That God and His kingdom will judge when the time comes.
Yeah.
But you, for now, love.
Yeah.
Love that person because it may be your love that gets them through this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so that's kind of where I'm at.
No, that's really good. I think, in my time as the senior pastor here at Crossroads, there's been no shortage of issues, right? I had to address the Black Lives Matter issue.
Absolutely, yep.
I was kind of in some of the front lines when it came to COVID and the restrictions on churches and had to speak to that.
Front lines, no kidding. Hey, Matt, I know you've been in for 3 months. By the way, we're going to close church for a few weeks.
And so so entering into the political sphere of an issue like that, right? We addressed the Israel-Palestine conflict and what that looks like. And I think that every time I approach that, anytime it's that there's something greater going on than what's happening in these walls or even in the relative community that we're in, it's when we address it, I think what you said is exactly right, that we approach it from love. I used to have on my phone this question that every time I opened my phone, it would say, the question was, what does love require of me? In this moment, what does love require of me? And there's a quote from Augustine that always sticks in my mind when it comes to politics. And what he said is that politics is nothing more than the practical application of loving your neighbor well. Now, we come from it from different angles. We see it with different eyes. But it's we're trying to love this person well. And as soon as I try to demonize the person on the other side and I lose faith that they're actually trying to love this person well, or I never admit it in the beginning, then I think that's where we see the public discourse break down. And so, my approach in this, and I realize that unlike most people, that because of what I represent, not who I am, but what I represent in this church, is that I have a different level of access to spaces. And so, for example, in this issue, instead of signing the petition letter and showing up on the Capitol steps and protesting, or even remaining quiet, right? I reached out to the representatives and actually had a conversation. And my email to them was, hey, look, I'd just like to have a conversation. I'd just like to understand, your view of this bill, why there's passion behind it, and what does the future look like in this? And I'd like to share some of my concerns from a faith perspective.
Sure.
Would you be willing to have a conversation? The answers have been yes. And so I've been able to share from a Crossroads Church perspective with the people who are making decisions, where it is that we're at and some of the concerns that we have. Now, at the end of the day, they're going to vote however they vote.
Absolutely.
But the voice, at least represented by this body, in me, has been vocalized in the right places. And there's something in me that just says, I think that when it comes to public discourse, some of the quiet diplomacy probably works better than the yelling at each other.
Well, and you said it just a second ago, and I think it's something that it's really important that we bring up, and that's the idea of perspective. Because in the end, if you look at it, we really are kind of fighting. Everybody's fighting the same direction. We're trying to help something.
Yes.
Now, we all come at it from different angles.
Particularly at the local level.
Particularly nationally, that's a whole nother.
Right.
Please don't get me started on that. But locally, city, state, whatever municipality that you're talking about, we're all trying to make something better. And it could be from different perspectives. It could be, and I think if we look to acknowledge that somebody may have a different perspective than you, because that's where the battle comes in, right?
Yes.
I don't like your perspective, and I'm going to tell you about it.
Yep.
But if we all look at the perspective of somebody else, and, like the, saying has gone for hundreds of years, walk a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
I think we come back to that center point of treating somebody with love and kindness, and where the church is really kind of the boss of, that's their thing. You want love and kindness. Oddly, we're kind of set up for that.
Yes.
And so that's the big thing. I see all the, other churches fighting for it and doing all that stuff. And okay, I know I understand your perspective of you're fighting for what the cause that you believe is best for somebody else.
Yep.
But maybe take a step back and think about where those other people are from. Do what you did. Reach out to some of these people on both sides of the issues and say, hey, from a church perspective, this is what we're thinking. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it might be something you want to think about.
Yeah. I think the guy that does this best is kind of, we wrap this podcast down, at least in the Denver area, is my buddy Dave Runyon.
Okay.
He wrote the book Art of Neighboring. He was an Arvada pastor and was really convicted when he had basically a lunch with the mayor and asked what the churches could do. And she really kind of just revolutionized his thought with a question of like, what does it, just go and love your neighbor.
Sure.
And out of that, he actually started something called City Connect and is at the center of a lot of things that are happening in the Colorado area. He has a seat, at the table when it comes to these issues and representing Christianity well. And he's done that not by, lining up protests, but by coming in, being as loving as he can, trying to demonstrate Jesus as best as he can. And in that, he's earned a hearing that's far greater than any pastor in the state, to be honest with you. And so, we could probably talk for hours about this issue.
Absolutely.
It's a big thing happening in Colorado. We just wanted to spend some time talking about it. And so, I think that's all I have to say. Anything else you have, Stu?
Like you said, we could go on for hours on end, but
All right.
I think that kind of wraps it up. If you're listening to this, focus on loving the people around you. That's my biggest thing, is do your best with that. Remember that people have different perspectives.
Yeah.
You can't force your ideas and thoughts into somebody else's head.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's the big thing, is you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what anybody's going through. Taking time to care for them in some manner. Hey, a little prayer. Offer up a little prayer on their behalf.
Yes.
There's nothing that says you can't do that. And just take that moment and offer some love.
Yeah, that's a good word. Well, if you're looking in the area, the Denver area, of a church to be a part of, we'd love for you to maybe check out Crossroads. You can check us out at crossroadsabc.com, or you can stop by. We're right at 128th and Thornton. If you like the podcast, Stu and I would encourage you to send it on. So thanks for listening today. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Collision. This podcast is a production of Crossroads Church in Thornton, Colorado. For more excellent content, please visit crossroadsabc.com.